Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are getting back into the First Samuel. And before we begin, this is again David, and so people are again going to be easily offended. So I hold very unconventional beliefs. I hold a very unconventional Bible study. We are reading this from front to back, and we are not apologizing for it at all the way through. And so there is a chance that you will not like this, and I am not offended if you don't want to stick around. But if you are curious and you're wondering, some things just don't add up, maybe there are answers out there. You might have stumbled into the right place. I suggest you start in Genesis. But if you don't want to, or if you've been following along, we're going to dive into the book of First Samuel because we left off in First Samuel. We're going to be in chapter 25 because we left off at chapter 24. This is the death of Samuel. And when Samuel died, all Israel gathered to mourn for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. And then David went out and went down into the wilderness of Paran. All right, let's look at stuff. Right? Samuel is up here. He dies, let's see, it's right here. He's in Gibeon. And he's supposedly buried right here. There's Samuel National Park. This is the tomb of Samuel right here. So this is just north of Jerusalem. And then he goes to the wilderness of Paran, which is probably down in this area. The reason being because him and Saul don't get along. Saul wants to kill him for whatever reason we are not going to rehash yesterday. Today brings all its own brand new issues, and so we'll stick with just where we're at. Now, there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. Let's look at that real quick. That is right here. This is currently Maon, this is Carmel. This is most likely exactly the area we are talking about. And that is to the southeast of Hebron. This is probably the wilderness of Paran at that point, right? But this is the Moabites. Or no, this is the Moabites over here. The Midianites were down here. The Amalekites, I think, are over here. This is, when they start talking about Gath, there are 5 cities of the Philistines. They are right here. Pretty much from Ashkelon, or actually from Ashdod down. This whole strip right here has continuously been the property of the Philistines. But he's over here right now, and he is fighting over here right now. So there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and he was a very wealthy man with 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And she was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was harsh and evil in his dealings. And while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So David sent 10 young men and instructed them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name, and say to him, 'Long life to you and peace to you and to your house and all that belongs to you. Now, I hear that it is time for shearing. And when your shepherds were with us, we did not harass them, and nothing of theirs was missing the whole time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. So let my young men find favor with you, for we have come on the day of the feast, and please give whatever you can afford to your servants and to your son David.'" Now, I understand that a lot of people are unfamiliar with the underworld, but what is happening right here is what they call a shakedown. This is a strong arm tactic. This is, you pay me a little bit, I'll make sure nothing happens to you. No, nobody comes by with baseball bats and they break your knees, You give me a little taste. That's all it takes. That's what this is. This is very much a mafioso, a gang lord, somebody who is a fugitive from the law, the rightful authority. Now, supposedly, he has been anointed, right? But nobody knows that. Nobody knows that he is anointed king, even right now, except for Samuel, David, and his immediate family, and they are all keeping it a secret. Samuel knows, but Saul doesn't know. Samuel was dead, but Saul doesn't know. Jonathan doesn't know. Nobody knows that David is supposed to be king. What he is somebody who likes to fight. He likes to fight a lot, and he has been good at it ever since Goliath. And he has relied on this to make his way in life. He's a merchant of the roads, shall we say. He doesn't have any goods to sell, but he'll sure take what you got. And so it's important to note that this man, who was chosen by God himself to be anointed king of Israel and to lead them in the ways of righteousness, is a highwayman and a thug. A bloodthirsty one. We'll see that in a minute too, so don't get your panties in a twist quite yet. He is not in any manner a good dude. Like at all. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. Quite the opposite. He starts a pattern here today that we'll see again, but let's just go. And so, when David's young men arrived, they relayed all these words to Nabal on behalf of David, and then they waited. But Nabal asked them, "Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants these days are breaking away from their masters. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give them to men whose origin I do not know?" Now, given the story that we have been given, there is a 0% chance that this guy who lives this close to Hebron does not know who David is. David is a hero of the land. He cut off the giant's head when he was a child. He was the armor bearer for the king. He played the harp to relieve his headaches. Whatever, he was the golden child, and this guy lives close to town. But they didn't have TV, but they didn't have shit else to do but talk. They were working or they were gossiping and telling stories. That was it. And this story, the story of David, has already been circulating in the land for how long? So maybe this guy is saying, "I don't believe you're from David," but he did not say, "I don't know who David is." Right? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, he could say, "I don't believe you're from there. Show me some proof that you're from him." But he has to know who it is. He has to. There's no way. So it's an inconsistency, right? That's a consistency error right here. It's not a major one. It's not one of those big, bold, whatever, but it is. Why should I take my bread and water and meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give them to men whose origin I do not know? So this is a shopkeeper being like, "No, this is my shop. Why should I pay you for protection?" And so David's men turned around and went back, and they relayed to him all these words. And David said to his men, "Strap on your swords." So David and all his men put on their swords, and about 400 men followed David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. That's an important division because that happens again. Not necessarily because it's an important number as far as I know, right? But that is, right, 2/3 go and 1/3 stays. So that is a division of a third, for whatever it's worth. And meanwhile, one of Nabal's young men informed Nabal's wife Abigail, "Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he scolded them. Yet these men were very good to us. When we were in the field, we were not harassed, and nothing of ours went missing the whole time we lived among them. They were a wall around us both day and night, and the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now, consider carefully what you must do, because disaster looms over our master and all his household. For he is such a scoundrel that nobody can speak to him." That's got to be slander. Right? Now, to a certain degree, there wasn't the freedom of movement that we have currently here in the United States, right? That is, what we do here is really unique. There was time when you had to ask somebody's permission if you wanted to move down the street. Now, we go through a process of buying houses and renting houses, and that's kind of like asking permission. We get permits so that we can make sure the conditions are safe. And that's kind of like asking permission. But what I mean is, these people could tell you, no, you cannot move. Get your ass back in the field. And that was like normal. That's not unusual. They're like, no. Maybe you could convince them. Maybe there was some reason. But for the most part, even though it wasn't considered slavery, a lot of these people were servants. And those servants had no say whatsoever. They just got their own spending money, right? They didn't get to choose their jobs. They didn't get to choose where they lived. They didn't get to choose none of that. They were assigned those things. That is the history of humanity until recently. And so, if you have a standing agreement with these people, that's one thing. But this is him coming in talking about, I protected you. Like, it's obvious they don't have an agreement, right? And so this guy is trying to portray Nabal as a scoundrel. But we've talked before about how the victor writes the history and David is the victor. Like, repeatedly. I mean, he's good at combat. He's a vicious man. He does what needs to be done. And so he's not a good man at all. But we have to see Nabal as a not good man. But what does Nabal stand up for here? Nabal is standing up for his possessions on his property from people that he doesn't know. He doesn't have an agreement. These people don't own the land. The people with David don't own the land. That's not their land. They're out there on the roads, protecting the roadways the same way they're protecting this man. They're bandits. That's why Saul's hunting him, right? He didn't want to be an armor bearer anymore, maybe. And so he's out there and he's fomenting discord. He is out there with an army of 600 people. That's a lot of people. Like, we see these big numbers, and these big numbers are enormous numbers. But a 600-man fighting force is nothing to be ignored. 400 men fighting, even with the 1/3 held in reserve, which is tactically sound. Even with that, 400 men is an enormous fighting force. And he is taking this enormous fighting force to some guy who keeps sheep. Because the guy who keeps sheep wouldn't give him something for protecting him. Now, maybe it was legitimate protection. We don't know that. I doubt it highly. Right? There's probably bandits, but the bandits seem to be David. And so, that's all I'm saying. Like, we're going to move on. I'm not going to pound it anymore, but they have to put Nabal off as a bad guy. And then Abigail hurried, and she took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 butchered sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisin, 200 cakes of figs, and she loaded them on donkeys, and said to her young men, "Go ahead of me, I will be right behind you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. All right, let's take just a second and quantify that. 200 loaves of bread. Like, a loaf of bread, about a foot, about 4 inches, 5 inches tall, 6 if you're lucky, it rises that big. A little bit, pretty close to a football, but more oblong. Like, 200 of those, that is a significant investment by itself. That is a lot of wheat, water, and yeast, and salt. Don't forget salt. So that by itself is a significant investment. 2 skins. These skins are not like, everybody's got the concept of the water skin. No. This was a wine skin. Wine skins are big. Like, they're rather narrow. They're about this big around. But they were made so that if you had to travel with them, you would wrap them around your body. They were really long. They weren't like these little foot-long things. They were big, probably 10 to 15 gallons of wine in them. So Two of those is another significant investment. 5 butchered sheep. That is, again, a lot of meat. You're looking at what, 70, 80 pounds dressed times 5. So that's a good investment of meat, right? And then 5 sayas, I'm guessing that's like larger than a pound of roasted grain, and 100 clusters of raisins. Again, that is a lot. That is withheld from the press to make the wine. That is withheld from eating now. That is saved and preserved for later. That is 100 vines, right? 100 clusters. So you take a whole cluster of grapes and you turn them into raisins. And then 200 cakes of figs. Again, that is a significant investment. It takes many years for figs to produce. They don't produce a whole lot, right? You get a good bit for a good couple of people, but to do 200 cakes of figs, that is a lot of trees. So this is a fortune that she is bringing to David to try to bribe him into not killing everybody there. And as Abigail came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, she saw David and his men coming down towards her, and she met them. Now, David had just finished saying, "In vain I have protected all that belonged to this man in the wilderness. Nothing that belongs to him has gone missing, yet he has paid me back evil for good. May God punish David, and ever so severely, if I let one of Nabal's men survive until morning." Again, he did not have an agreement with this man for protection. He is going to enforce the strong arm. He sent the men to make the threat, and now he has to back it up. And when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off the donkey and fell face down and bowed before him. She fell at his feet and said, "My lord, may the blame be on me alone. But please let your servant speak to you. Hear the words of your servant. My lord, I should pay no attention to this scoundrel Nabal, for he lives up to his name. His name means fool, and folly accompanies him. I, your servant, did not see my lord's young men whom you sent. Now, my lord, as surely as the Lord lives, and you yourself live, the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and avenging yourself with your own hand. May your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be like Nabal." What do you mean, be like Nabal? May your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be like Nabal. Nabal is fun. Nabal is back at the party, chilling. He has no clue. You're even out here selling his shit to the thug from down the road. He has no clue that you are giving away his stores to this guy who is threatening his life. He doesn't know that. So he's at home celebrating the harvest. He just had a great year. Now, let this gift your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow you. Please, forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will surely make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because he fights my Lord's battles. May no evil be found in you as long as you live. Sorry. That blessing doesn't make it. And should someone pursue you and seek your life, then the life of my Lord will be bound securely by the Lord your God in the living bundle of the living. But he shall fling away the lives of your enemies like stones from a sling. And when the Lord has done for my Lord all the good he has promised, and when he has appointed you ruler over Israel, then my Lord will have no remorse or guilt of conscience over needless bloodshed and revenge. And when the Lord has dealt with my Lord, may you remember your maidservant." Now, I want to take a minute here and point out the phraseology right here, because it becomes important when we get into Psalms. And when the Lord has done for my Lord all the good he has promised is a third person narrative. That is important to notice, because it is important to note that maybe all of the Psalms were not written by the person who came up with them. Instead, they were dictated. And instead of David, for instance, writing something down, he dictates it to someone else. and that someone else writes it down, and the Lord said to my Lord, it won't be pulled totally random when I talk about it then. Because it's the same thing here. This is someone else talking about someone else and recording that. It's just coincidental, and I want to point it out because it happens repeatedly, but in this one particular instance, it means that he is specifically divine. And we're going to deal with that later, but not right now. And when the Lord has done good for my Lord and all the good he promised, and when he has appointed you over the ruler of Israel. And then David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me this day. And blessed is your discernment, and blessed are you, because today you have kept me from bloodshed, and from avenging myself by my own hand. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, then surely no male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by morning light. And then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, go home in peace. See, I have heeded your voice and granted your request. And when Abigail returned to Nabal, there he was in the house holding a feast fit for the king, and in high spirits and very drunk. And so she told him nothing until morning light. And in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him about these events, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. And then about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal dead. So this can be one of two things, and you can take it however you want to. This could be the Lord has decided that his good and worthy servant David was righteous and that Nabal was not. Although we have seen zero evidence that Nabal was not, other than it said he was a rough man, right? That's the only thing that was said. And so what we have is a wife who was probably a little bit disgruntled, and she went out to save him and come back. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are a multitude of herbs and plants that are dangerous to people. And if you intake these, they can cause a stroke or a heart attack or some serious problems. It can cause you to be like a stone and lay in a coma for 10 days and then pass on smoothly and silently. Now, it may be that God took vengeance on Nabal. It absolutely could be, because that is well within God's divine right. But what did Nabal do? What did he do that was so offensive to God that he would be struck down for this? He stood up for himself against the strong arm. That's what he did. You can argue that David was not strong arming him. There is no evidence that I can find that they had an agreement that David and his men would protect us. David and his men took that upon themselves. And so, as such, they had no right to expect anything. Even if it was the custom. If you didn't go and talk to them and say, hey, look, you could send your messengers then, or you send 10 men and be like, look, we're protecting your stuff. Like, we're not going to charge you anything now, but come harvest, hit us with a little bit of something. And then it's an agreement that's worked out prior. But no, you have to get vengeance because you decided to do something. We're gonna keep you safe, homie. And in exchange for that, you're gonna give us a cut. That's not the right way. That is not righteousness. Period. The end. And so, if God took vengeance upon Nabal, then he did so unjustly. Because Nabal was only standing up for his stuff. He was taking from the harvest to give to his men. That's what he said. He was going to give to his people out of his profit. Why would he give to these other people? There was nothing righteous in this act. And we have a disgruntled housewife. And maybe he was heavy-handed. I don't know. Maybe he did beat her around. It would not be uncommon. And so what she did was she took advantage of the situation. She took advantage of a situation. And we're going to find out exactly what that situation is right now. You want to see it? Let's do it. And on hearing that Nabal was dead, David said, blessed be the Lord who has upheld my cause against the reproach of Nabal, and restrained his servant from evil. for the Lord has brought the wickedness of Nabal down upon his own head. And then David sent word to Abigail, asking for her in marriage. And when his servants came to Abigail at Carmel, they said, David has sent us to take you as his wife. And she arose, and then bowed face down and said, Here is your maidservant, ready to serve and to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. And so Abigail hurried and got on her donkey, and attended by 5 of her maidens, she followed David's messengers and became his wife. And David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel. So she and Abigail were both his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Palti, son of Laish, who was from Galilee. So what happened there? The husband suddenly dies, and the wife suddenly becomes David's. That's a pattern. And then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah and said, Is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, opposite Jeshimon? And so Saul, accompanied by 3,000 chosen men of Israel, went down to the wilderness of Ziph to search for David there. And Saul camped beside the road at the hill of Hachilah, opposite Jeshimon. But David was living in the wilderness, and when he realized that Saul followed him there, David sent out spies to verify that Saul had arrived. And then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. And he saw the place where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the general of his army, had laid down. And Saul was lying inside the inner circle of the camp, with the troops camped around him. And David asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, Who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? I will go with you, answered Abishai. And that night David and Abishai came to the troops, and Saul was lying there asleep in the inner circle of the camp with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. And Abner and the troops were lying around him. And Abishai said to David, Today God has delivered your enemy into your hand. Now, therefore, please let me thrust the spear into the ground with one stroke. I will not need to strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, Do not destroy him, for who can lift a hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David added, As surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will strike him down. Either this day will come, and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Instead, take the spear and water jug by his head, and let us go. And so David took the spear and water jug by Saul's head, and they departed. And no one saw them or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They all remained asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. So they were sneaky. I know some people who were in recon that can do the exact same thing. That is not divine intervention. I know some people, I can't do it. I am not nearly that talented. But I know some people that could sneak up on you and, face paint you in your sleep when you're surrounded by everybody you know. I do. I know some people that can do it. And so I'm not putting it past the Lord to put a deep sleep on them, but most of the time, if you make it past the outer watch, you're fine on the inside of the camp, as long as you know what you're doing and you're about your business. And again, I am not that sneaky, but I do know people who are. And then David crossed to the other side and stood atop the mountain at a distance, and there was a wide gulf between them. And David shouted to the troops and to Abner, the son of Ner, Will you not answer me, Abner? Who calls the king? He didn't call the king, he called Abner. And David said to Abner, You are a man, aren't you? Who in Israel is your equal? Why then did you not protect your lord the king when one of the people came to destroy him? This thing you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, all of you deserve to die, since you did not protect your lord, the Lord's anointed. Now look around. Where are the king's spear and the water jug that were by his head? And then Saul recognized David's voice and asked, Is that your voice, David, my son? It is my voice, my lord and king, David said. And he continued, Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done? You're a bandit. What evil is in my hand? You're a bandit. Now, please, may my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, then he may accept an offering. But if the men have done it, may they be cursed in the presence of the Lord. For today they have driven me away from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go serve other gods. So do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. And then Saul replied, I have sinned. Come back, David, my son. I will never harm you again, because today you considered my life precious. I have played the fool and committed a grave error. Here is the king's spear, David answered. Let one of your young men come over and get it, and may the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. For the Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and rescue me from all trouble. And Saul said to him, May you be blessed, David my son. You will accomplish great things and will surely prevail. And so David went on his way, and Saul returned home. Now, okay, this is another repeated pattern of Saul trying to kill David. And we don't know why, right? We don't know why. Because there was no reason prior to him being abandoned. But now that he has fled from justice and he is hiding from the king, and the king is hunting him because he's abandoned, again he has to prove his loyalty by not killing the king. Now, he's already done that once, explicitly, and several times implicitly. So there has to be an outside driving force, and it's probably the people saying, hey, this guy's abandoned. He's making you look bad. That's probably why he took 3,000 men to go find these 400. Now, finding men in the wilderness is an onerous task. It is a hard thing to do. And you don't want to be separated too greatly and have 100 people stumble upon 400, right? So you have to make your search in a large party. And it's expensive to have that many people out there. There has to be a driving force to have 3,000 men scouring the wilderness. There has to be a reason. There has to. Saul would not do it without cause. It is not a thing. People do not sink resources for no reason. They may have the wrong reasons, but they have a reason. And so Saul considers David a legitimate threat for some reason. And until he is proven wrong twice, he goes with that because it is obvious that that is the case. David, however, said to himself, One of these days I will be swept away by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. And then Saul will stop searching for me all over Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. So David set out with his 600 men and went to Achish, son of Moab, the king of Gath. Now, we talked before, but let's look at it again. From Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, I believe, was right here. And then there was two more down here. Rapha, I think, is one of them. And so this was the 5 cities of the giants, the Philistines. And so he's going to the land of the Philistines to get away from Saul, because he has been abandoned in the land of Judea. And so David sent out with his 600 men and went to Achish, son of Maoch, the king of Gath. And David and his men settled in Gath with Achish. Each man had his family with him, and David had his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, the widow of Nabal. And when Saul learned that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. See? And then David said to Achish, If I have found favor in your eyes, let me be assigned a place in one of the outlying towns, so that I can live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you? And that day Achish gave him Ziklag, and to this day it still belongs to the kings of Judah. And the time that David lived in the Philistine territory amounted to 1 year and 4 months. So for 1 year and 4 months, from this city, right, you have 5 cities. So it's not this city probably rolled out this way, and this city rolled out this way, and this city rolled out this way. So it is not unreasonable to assume that Ziklag is out in this direction. But nobody knows. There's no definitive, this was where it's at. But It was probably out here. It is definitely bordering on the Negev. Oh, and he was there in their territory for a total of 1 year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. From ancient times, these people had inhabited the land extending to Shur and Egypt. Right? And whenever David attacked a territory, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but he took the flocks and herds and donkeys and camels and clothing. Where have you? And they would return to Achish, who would ask him, "Where have you raided today?" And David would reply, "The Negev of Judah, the Negev of Jahrameel, and the Negev of the Kenites." He's such a great guy. He's a very good pro-Israel type of person. And David did not leave a woman, a man, or a woman alive to be brought to Gath. For he said, "Otherwise they will report us, saying, 'This is what David did.' And this was David's custom the whole time he lived in Philistine territory." So Achish trusted David, thinking, "Since he has made himself an utter stench to his people in Israel, he will be my servant forever." David is attacking Israel. David is going and destroying Israeli towns, putting to the sword Israeli men, women, and children, and taking their plunder. That's what he is doing here. This part right here gets glossed over real fast in the church. People do not want to talk about this part right here because he is serving the giants. Right? This is the same people that they were at war with when he cut off the head of Goliath. Goliath's 4 brothers are still alive. He is in this land right now as a representative of these people instead of his people, because he has made himself a stench already in the land of Israel, and now he is making himself a stench even more in the land of Israel. He went from the king's armor bearer to strong-armed thug, road bandit. And now he is living on the edge of the wilderness and raiding into his old homeland and killing his old neighbors, his kindred, his people, his bloodlines. That's who is dying. He's not a righteous man. Now, in those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for warfare against Israel. And so Achish said to David, "You must understand that you and your men are to go out to battle with me." And David replies, "Say less. Then you will come to know what your servant can do." Not only, "All right, cool, I'll do that." No, he's eager. He's like, "Yeah, then you're going to see something. Cut me loose. Let me go. Right to the battle lines." That's what he wants. He's bloodthirsty. Bloodthirsty. "Very well," said Achish. "I will make you my bodyguard for life." Now, by this time Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed the mediums and spiritists from the land. Really? Well, that's interesting. Because they're already told not to consult those, right? They're already supposed to be gone. And so when the holy man dies, Saul gets rid of him. Well, I'll be daggummed. That's an interesting turn of events, because we keep being told that Saul doesn't follow God, but we keep being shown that he kind of does. And the Philistines came together and camped at Shunem, while Saul gathered all Israel and camped at Gilboa. And when Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid and trembled violently. And he inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. So he has banished all the wrongdoers from his land. He has tried his best, like we talked about that before. He tried his best to do what he thought God wanted him to do. Now, David has twice now refused to touch him because he was the king. Well, when Saul went and conquered, he didn't kill the king. And that was the whole problem. That is the whole problem. That is this. Instead of that, he was bringing him back to be a slave because you don't kill the king. And then he brought back some plunder to devote to the Lord because that's what you do. God really likes blood. So you take it back and you spill the blood on the altar. And then it's like super blessing. That's what the understanding is. But sure, he was disobedient. And he has done nothing but try his best to do what he thought God was telling him to do. And what happens? He's the one that winds up cursed. God doesn't answer him. But he answered the holy man who was a medium and a spiritualist. And then Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium so I can go consult her." And there is a medium at Endor, his servants replied. So Saul disguised himself by putting on different clothes, and he set out with 2 of his men. They came to the woman at night, and Saul said, "Consult the spirit for me. Bring up for me the one I name." But the woman replied, "Surely you know what Saul has done, how he has killed the mediums and spiritists in the land. Why have you set a trap to get me killed?" And then Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this." "And whom shall I bring up for you?" the woman asked. "Bring up Samuel," he replied. But when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out in a loud voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." "Do not be afraid," the king replied. "What do you see?" "I see a god, or a divine spirit," right? A spirit or a divine being, "coming up out of the earth," the woman answered. "And what does he look like?" "An old man is coming up, and he is wearing a robe." So Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed face down in reverence to the dead. And then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" "I am deeply distressed," replied Saul. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do." "Why do you consult me?" asked Samuel, "since the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy? He has done exactly what he spoke through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David." That was not spoken. Now, tear the kingship out of your hand, yes, but it didn't say the neighbor David. As far as I remember, I'm pretty sure that's not right. I always hold the possibility that I'm wrong and I'm misremembering and I forget things. So, "And because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his burning anger against Amalek, the Lord has done this to you today. Moreover, the Lord will deliver Israel with you into the hands of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, and the Lord will deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines." And immediately Saul fell flat on the ground, terrified by the words of Samuel, and his strength was gone because he had not eaten anything all that day and night. And when the woman came to Saul and saw how distraught he was, she said to him, "Look, your maidservant has obeyed your voice. I took my life in my hands and did as you told me. Now, please listen to your servant and let me set a morsel of bread before you so you may eat and have the strength to go on your way." And Saul refused, saying, "I will not eat." But his servants joined the woman in urging him, and he heeded their voice, and he got up from the ground and sat on the bed. And the woman had a fattened calf at her house, and she quickly slaughtered it. And she also took flour and kneaded it and baked the unleavened bread. And she served it to Saul and his servants, and they ate. And that night they got up and left. So again, we have an evidence of Saul trying to be faithful. Saul is unable to get a response from God, so he goes to the one person who is dead that he thinks might be able to answer him. He goes against all of his convictions and beliefs because he ordered these people dead because he believes they should be dead. And so he goes against all of that to seek God, as he has done the whole way. Nothing but trying to seek God. And he did so after fasting. He wasn't raising the spirit. He fasted and then sought advice, as he should. That's literally what you're supposed to do. Fast and seek God's word. Now, did he go about it right? Not for me to decide. I don't hold the distaste for spiritualists like other people do. I don't deal with spirits because I don't trust them. So that's that. I don't trust anything outside of myself and God. Like, God is beyond any spirit that you actually meet. So there's that. And now the Philistines brought all their forces together at Aphek, while Israel camped by the spring in Jezreel. And as the Philistine leaders marched out of their units of hundreds and thousands, David and his men marched behind them with Achish. And then the commanders of the Philistines asked, "What about these Hebrews?" And Achish replied, "Is this not David, the servant of the king Saul of Israel? He has been with me all these days, even years, and from the day he defected until the day I found no fault with him." Now, he was only there for a year and 4 months. Not years, but a year and 4 months. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with Achish and told him, "Send that man back and let him return to the place you assigned him. He must not go down with us into battle, only to become our adversary during the war. What better way for him to regain the favor of his master than with the heads of our men? Is this not the David about whom they sing in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." So Achish summoned David and told him, "As surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright in my sight, and it seems right that you should march in and out with me in the army, because I have found no fault with you from the day you came to me until this day. But you have no favor in the sight of the leaders. Therefore, turn back now and go in peace, so that you will not do anything to displease the leaders of the Philistines." "But what have I done?" David replied. "What have you found against your servant from the day I came unto you until today, to keep me from going along to fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" And Achish replied, "I know that you are pleasing in my sight as an angel of God. But the commanders of the Philistines have said, he must not go into battle with us. Now then, get up early in the morning, along with your master's servants who came with you, and go as soon as it is light." And so David and his men got up early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. And on the third day, David and his men arrived in Ziklag, and the Amalekites had raided the Negev, attacked Ziklag, and burned it down. They had taken captive the women and all who were there, both young and old, but they had not killed anyone, but they had carried them off as they went on their way. Well, that's very different than David. David kills everyone. And so David and his men came to the city. They found it burned down, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and the troops with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no strength left to weep. And David's two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel, had been taken captive. And David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of every man grieved for his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. And then David said to Abiathar, the priest, son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, "Should I pursue these raiders? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," the Lord replied, "for you will surely overtake them and rescue the captives." So David and his 600 men went from the brook of Besor, where some stayed behind, because 200 men were too exhausted to cross the brook. But David and 400 men continued in pursuit. Now, again, this is not an unusual division, but they're using this now as the example for how they divide spoils later. Now his men found an Egyptian in the field, and they brought him to David. And they gave the man water to drink and food to eat, a piece of a fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins. So he ate and was revived, for he had not had any food or water for 3 days and 3 nights. And then David asked him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" "I am an Egyptian, he replied, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me 3 days ago when I fell ill. We raided the Negev of the Cherethites, the territory of Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned down Ziklag. Will you lead me to these raiders? David asked. And the man replied, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hand of my master, and I will lead you to them. So he led David down, and there were the Amalekites spread out all over the land, eating and drinking and celebrating the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until evening the next day. Not a man escaped, except 400 young men who fled, riding off on camels. And so David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, son or daughter, or any of the plunder the Amalekites had taken. David brought everything back, and he recovered all the flocks and herds, which his men drove ahead of the other livestock, calling out, this is David's plunder. So, let's look at this for a second. It is reasonable to assume that after 3 days they were partying. Okay. They have raided successfully. They are making it back. They go ahead, kick it off, get pissy drunk, pass out. But this says that he took 400 men and killed them for an entire day. From twilight until the next day. Right? Well, let's find it exactly. From twilight until evening of the next day. So almost 24 hours. That's a long time to be fighting, boss. I don't know if you're aware. But that's a long time to be swinging some iron. That's a long damn time to be toe-to-toe and fighting somebody. So they took them by advantage during the middle of the night. That's how they do things, right? And so they caught them drunk and passed out and went through stabbing them through the middle of the night. And what probably happened the next day was they were spent dividing between the women and children who were supposed to go back with David and the ones who didn't. Because David doesn't let people go back home. Not unless they're with him. And so David recovered everything, and they said, this is David's plunder. And the spoils are divided. When David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him from the brook of Besor, they came out to meet him and the troops with him. As David approached the men, he greeted them. But all the wicked and worthless men among those who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered, except for each man's wife and children. They may take them and go. The way that this is portrayed is that these men refuse to go on. Now, we saw earlier that this division happened normally when 1/3 stays back with the supplies and the other 2/3 goes out to do battle. That is not an uncommon thing to happen. And so what's portrayed here and what's portrayed there is probably the same thing. We can't say for sure. It may be exactly as it's laid out, but why would they be worthless, right, and wicked men if they didn't want to share the spoils with some people who refused to fight? That's where the logical inconsistency comes in, right? Because they would not be wicked, right? If it's like they said, these people are too exhausted. Oh no, I just can't go on. And so they stay, and the other people go and not only pursue for the rest of the pursuit, but also engage in death for 24 hours. Why would they want to share any of the plunder? That would not make them wicked. That would make them sensible. These people chose not to come. But David needs 600 people, and 600 beats 400 every day, especially if you just probably lost a few. My brothers, you must, or David said, my brothers, you must not do this with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiders who came against us. Who will listen to your proposal? The share of the one who went to battle will match the share of the one who stayed with the supplies. They will share alike. And so it has been from that day forward. David established this statute as an ordinance for Israel to this very day. And that right there is the entire reason for this part of the story. And when David arrived in Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a gift from you, from the plunder of the Lord's enemies." And then he sent gifts to those in Bethel, Ramoth, Negev, and Jatir, to those in Aroer, Siphmoth, and Eshtemoa, to those in Rakal, and in the cities of the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Borashan, and Athak, and to those in Hebron, and in all the places where David and his men had roamed. To all the places where he had been abandoned, he now sends restitution because he has been rejected by the Philistines. Now, he was perfectly willing the morning of to go into battle against these very people. But now, he doesn't know Saul is dead, right? But now he's making peace with all of these people so that he can return, because he just killed a whole lot of Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites came and they were raiding over here, and they came back and they saw that his city was undefended because he went with the Philistines. He took his whole people and rolled out. And they went to go fight the Israelites, and they got raided. And they come back from the raid, they see the raid, and they go and kill these people. Well, that's not going to go over well with those people's people. He's got to do something. And obviously the rest of the Philistines are not with him. So he takes the stuff that he loots, and he bribes his way back into the good graces of the law. Now, the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed Saul's son Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchusah. When the battle intensified against Saul, the archers overtook him and wounded him critically. And then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run it through me, or these uncircumcised men will come and run me through and torture me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and refused to do it, so Saul took his own sword and fell on him. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his own sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men died together that same day. And when the Israelites along the valley and those on the other side of the Jordan saw that the army of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their cities and ran away. And so the Philistines came and occupied their cities. And the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temples of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and hung his body on the wall of Bethshan. And when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all of their men of valor set out, journeyed all night, and retrieved the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And when they arrived at Jabesh, they burned the bodies there, and they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh. And they fasted for 7 days. And so we get to the end of 1 Samuel. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. I understand that I hold unconventional beliefs. I understand that I tend to step on toes. And while I don't do that intentionally, I do not apologize for it. Nor do I apologize for the things in this book. David is a ruthless man. We will see much more of that to come. David is a conniving and cunning and terrible person. And, well, we won't even start to talk about Solomon yet, but I understand that what I do here is not conventional. I understand that what I do here is not for everyone. I am okay if you're not happy with what I am doing, because I am. God is. He has not stopped me. In fact, He has encouraged me. The only reason I do this is because God has told me to, because we have been so very deceived by this book. It is a terrible, terrible thing that has been done to humanity by this book. And the light of day needs to be shed upon it. There are great and wonderful things from this book. You can absolutely get to know God in several different ways from the stories in this book. And if you read them, the way that we have been taught to read them, and you believe that you're fine. Like, you really are. But if you question, if you read this and you're like, wait, what? And you want to know a little bit more, right? That's why I do this. It's for the people who want to know a little bit more. If you're happy with Jesus Christ as your Savior and you believe that His blood was required for you, be blessed. If you believe that Muhammad was the prophet of Allah and that if you uphold the pillars of Islam, be blessed. If you believe in the three tenets of Zoroastrianism, or if you believe in Buddhism or Sikhism or whatever it is where you have found your salvation, be blessed. God loves you. Be true to Him. Don't do the bad things. You'll be all right. The only thing ever required for you to get to know God was a sacrifice. But that sacrifice was your sin. It was never an animal. It was never a human. It was you. He wants you to come to Him and to do His things. And so that is the light that I'm trying to shine. Like, we don't need these stories to find God. You can, but you don't need them. It's not necessary. It's needed for some people, but it's not necessary. And there's a difference between those two words. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.